better unemployment. What's happening in the economy?
I think we may be seeing a kind of W-shaped recession.
Oh, really?
Well, I think so, because I still think that we've not seen the full extent of the public sector cuts we need if we're going to deal with the deficit. So, and the public sector cuts will have an effect on the economy. So it may be a W-shaped recession.
Before we get into the second bit of the W, are we sure? Because on this programme we predicted that we were coming out of the recession on the third quarter, and that didn't happen. Are we sure, dead sure, that we've actually come out of it when we get the figures next week for the fourth quarter?
No, and even if I saw the figures, I wouldn't necessarily believe it, because, you know, we have pumped in, is it 200 billion now of quantitative easing, printing of money. Printing money. We pumped in 200 billion that way. We have interest rates at close to zero. So, you know, monetary conditions are incredibly lax. There's all this money frothing around in the economy. Now, that's got to go somewhere. So it's gone into funding the government debt through people buying gilts, and it's gone into the stock market. You know, the stock market has risen quite a bit. But
on a bubble. It's called a bubble.
It's a bubble. So I think the economy is much worse than it looks.
If your double dip happens before May the 6th election day,
we're all
doomed.
Yeah,
we're all
right.
doomed. Or Labour's doomed. All right.
So I'm keeping my fingers crossed.
The battle over the middle classes, the bourgeoisie. Can Mr. Brown really pose convincingly as a defender of the middle class?
Well, compared to an old Etonian who's married to a woman who's fourth generation landed gentry, yes, he can.
Really? What's he ever done for the middle class?
What, Brown? No, but if we're talking about the technical British class system, he is middle class.
Oh, he is.
And Cameron is rude.
Yeah,
and Cameron and Sam,
hold on,
lovely people,
are not.
ruling
They're upper
class.
middle class.
Yeah.
I understand that. But only a few months ago, at the Labour conference, Mr. Brown was telling us how he comes from such an ordinary background. He's had to struggle for everything that he's got in life. Fact is, he's now telling the truth. He comes from a solid middle-class family. So why should we believe him?
It's a solid Scottish middle-class family, which is...
But I mean, both parties have now got into a position where their narratives seem to me to be extremely confused. I mean, on the one hand, you know, Brown has now put tax on the middle classes up to 51% effectively, and yet he's claiming to be the...
52.
All right,
52 when the second insurance comes in.
I'll give you that, 52. So, you know, that's a pretty tough attack on the middle class, and yet he says he's a defender of the middle class. The Tories, on the other hand, you know, spent 3 years moving themselves to the centre ground, but now are being very gritty, very tough about public spending cuts. So that, I mean, it's not a completely inconsistent message, but it's a difficult one to absorb.
And also the Tories are making a big deal of how they're going to take away some of the welfare subsidies from the middle class. And they're going to make students will probably end up having to pay a lot more for the middle class backgrounds. Now, a lot of that may be the right thing to do, but at a time when the middle class are hurting, it's not necessarily electorally a great thing to do.
And of course, George Osborne has come out today in support of the Obama measures on the bankers. Now, the bankers are only a small minority of the middle classes, but nonetheless, but nonetheless, that's a signal too.
Isn't the blunt truth that only journalists can say is that whoever wins the next election, the middle class, middle Britain, is going to be squeezed?
Well, I think people are going to have problems across the piece because of the cuts in the public sector.
Yeah, but a really important point is that the vast majority of people in Britain are now middle class. This has been the transformation. You know, we've gone from a position in the 50s where, I don't know, maybe 20% were middle class to a position today where 80%
It's very interesting you said that, but when you poll people and ask them, are you middle class? Still a lot of people don't want to be
absolutely,
British.
and it means something in America to be middle class. When the Americans talk about middle class, it means just to be ordinary. That's all.
All right, let me put it another way.
Still means something different.
Let me put it another way. They are not working class. The number of people who make their living with their hands is now quite a small minority.
All right. Chilcot. 45 minutes to destruction. Turned out to be local colour. Discuss.
I remember it was